Hello, I'm Dan, and today we'll be chatting with Stephen Lee. Stephen and I have been working. How long have we worked together?
Close to 3 years, I think.
So the topic of the conversation that we're going to have today is about saving costs, and how can companies try to save on spendings. I guess especially considering the current context, the current economy, it's like quite a big thing. I mean, I've seen a lot of companies trying to cut their costs down like 20%, for some of the products they're building, and so yeah, I think it's quite a current and active topic.
Yeah, cost cutting is always a thing, regardless of the current climate or not. Companies will always seek to do something, do more for less. And one of the main things I've seen through lots of companies is just they always focus on a very short-term goal. They need to know the upfront cost of something. How much will this product cost to make? What's the return on investment? And traditionally, it's always been, let's just take, say, the big incumbent technology sectors, let's say banking or government. It's very common just to say, take the lowest bidder, some vendor, some IT consultancy, the lowest bidder, and outsource it, because that gets your capex down in the short term, and then somebody else will pay for it in the long term. So I think if you're really serious about cost cutting, companies should start taking a much longer view, especially with the current climate. It may not be the short, the immediate capex saving, but it will save you, in the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years or 10 years on.
Yeah. Yes, something I like to always throw out whenever there's a problem, whenever I see a difficulty in a product team, or in a company, is that 80% of your problem is actually a product problem rather than a technology problem. And so I like to say, for instance, well, if you want to cut costs, think about all your vanity features and everything that you build in your product. Does it actually create value, and is it really solving a user problem?
Yeah, absolutely. This is the difference between cost and value that a lot of people don't get. Cost being the actual, number value, the dollar figure you put on something, and value being, how much does that dollar work for you? You're spending money on something, great, that's the cost of it, but then you're building something that may or may not add any value to your business. And cutting that out, which quite often is the majority of features, right? You look at, let's take example projects that people do in these digital transformations. They take some sort of internal process and they think, right, let's build this from the ground up, digital technology. It's bring in a large team. Let's redesign it all, or hell, let's just rebuild the existing system in new technology and spend a huge amount of money doing so. Whereas, a better option might have just been redesign your entire process, and you might figure out that 80% of all the features or the tasks people are doing were redundant anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah, cutting them out. I mean, realistically, people will still hire a team, or put some contract out, and it would likely cost the same, but the value you're getting for that cost will be, orders of magnitude better if you just planned it out.
And so, actually, what's your current role right now?
Currently, I'm sort of a senior technology consultant at a company called Atos.
Does your role involve sort of cost-cutting measures right now?
Yes, actually, I'm in charge of architecting systems, or in designing entire solutions and architecting and implementing them, and training team members up in sort of why a certain technology is chosen in a certain environment and how to use it. Yeah. And obviously we cater to clients, and clients we bid for contracts, so we always want to be able to outbid someone else. So cost is very important to us. Like, the cheaper we can achieve something, the better, but we still have to achieve it.
So what are maybe some of the examples of the things that you see, where clients often overspend?
So I guess I'm talking about industry in general here as opposed to anything specific to my role.
Yeah.
But clients, the biggest cost is probably offshoring or having just estimating a project in terms of, say, man hours. This is a historic or traditional thing, and it's not sort of done in startups. But if you plan a project out wrong from the start, or don't have the necessary expertise at the planning stages, then this will massively inflate the costs. So if you don't know how a software development lifecycle works, you'll just take, you hire a consultant, they'll tell you wherever wherever you want to hear, and they can very easily overcharge you. And they would have to do that because if you don't really know the specifics of your project, there's no way they can give a much finer estimate. So straight away on the planning stages, you need to know exactly, have a clear idea of what you're planning to do, and ignore the implementation detail. That's for later. So do you plan to make a small product from scratch, like a startup style? Or do you plan to overhaul a large enterprise system? And these will have different costs as well. But then these costs can be astronomical if you decide to just say, let's just say pay IBM or Infosys or someone to do that. They may get the job done, but it will cost you a lot more than it could have been if you got much more, like a small number of specialists as opposed to a large number of generalists.
Yeah, I always like to say to businesses that it's really good for them to focus on the actual core expertise. And I'd say most businesses trying to outsource like this are the ones which don't specialize in technology and see it more as a cost center or a cost of running their business, because it's just about providing some basic features for their business to be able to run. And so what's the rationale behind this? Because for those kind of businesses, maybe using outsourcing would definitely help them focus on what's their core problem that they're solving.
Oh, definitely, yes. I mean, this is why it was done. Let's say I worked for River Island, and their company, they manufacture their own clothes. Technology arrived, and it was a necessity to do business, but it was not something they wanted to do. So you outsource that to experts, to a professional services company, an IT management company, and that's perfectly fine. It's not your part of business. You just simply outsource it. Great. That problem comes with, as time moves on, as new technologies become available, you are now locked into some vendor, and vendors will have their own interests at heart. They're not necessarily going to give you the most efficient way of doing things because they're simply charging it out to you anyway. And as you have more feature requests, as your business evolves, say in River Island's case, more people wanted to shop online. They needed more efficient ways to manage their inventory. They will have more requests to their vendors, and these requests come at cost to develop, especially since the IT vendors then are not part of your business. They don't know how you work. They don't know how your everyday staff use the systems that they're providing you. And if you have custom systems, as most businesses will, this will cost you a lot to build, and it won't be the product you need. And that then has the biggest cost of IT, which is the long-term maintenance of a system that doesn't quite do what it does. Let's take Shell, for example. They have a very old implementation of SAP. Now, there's nothing wrong with SAP. It is a good system, and they've built a system ideal for generic use. Shell have a very custom one, and it is aging. It can't be upgraded easily, but it is a necessary part of the business now, and then that means it costs both Shell and SAP tremendous amounts of resources to maintain. And I'd stress maintain, not add new features to, as that is difficult, but not impossible. So there is automatically a very large cost that you can't get rid of now because of poor decisions in the past.
As technology improves and as time evolves, more and more we have to move towards digital solutions for solving our problems. And being locked into this kind of vendor contract sort of prevents you from being able to iterate on a fast basis, you can't really validate new ideas, and you can't really work within a single team because all of this is locked elsewhere, and you have to rely on your vendor in order to kind of try out new solutions.
Yeah, and the answer to that then would be, again, let's use Shell as an example. They have their vendor, SAP, to manage their data, and that's their business. And then they can go to other consultancies like BCG to iterate and invent these new ideas. And that's a nice, that sticks with, Shell keeps their own core business going, the drilling and selling of oil, and then they've got their business running, and then now they can spend more money somewhere else to innovate on new ideas, these digital and new ideas. And the recent trend of spending on digital solutions, I think, is either driven by the promise of what new technologies can do for your business in terms of efficiency, so opening new revenue streams, or by customer demand. Let's say a bank, would customers want to do more through their phone? The new generation want interaction through a mobile. So then you have to provide to stay competitive. So there's always some driving factor behind these.
Well, the thing is that you're always sort of late to the party because you're not really innovating, because all those capabilities are actually sitting outside of your organization. So you can't really iterate and try new things.
Oh, yeah. It's more playing catch up, but you need to play catch up just to stay in the game. So it's still important. It may not be innovation for the industry, but it is innovation for a company to play catch up.
Okay, I think we steered a bit away from the actual topic of saving cost, but trying to go back to more of a technical ways of solving costs. What are some of the solutions that you've seen are working out pretty well?
Right. So let's say we've got we've got the perfect product, and now it's just an implementation detail. To me, the implementation, there are many ways to do it in an expensive way and cheap way. But overall, it's not a large percentage of the overall CapEx spend. So technology is far cheaper than people. And any company that will charge you 100 million to maintain a website, I mean, they're great if they can get someone to pay that. But understanding what technology actually costs is very important. So very simple things like a static website served on CDN is next to free. There's virtually no cost. It's so microscopic a cost compared to your overall capex. But the same website served on a large server-side system or some large CMS system, let's say Adobe, that these things are expensive in terms of licenses, in terms of what it takes to host them and serve them around the world. And that's before you factor in costs of adding new features. For the same cost, you could say have a small team, just 2 or 3 senior front-end developers building a static website and hosting it on a global CDN. And that is far cheaper for the same result, and you get more flexibility and more customizations possible.
So a lot of this is really down to how you architecture your product and how you utilize the different web services available to you.
Yeah, so if you architect your product with a deep knowledge of what you have and how you want to present it to the world, how you want to deploy it to the world, if you stay away from generic solutions like one size fits all, it's like, yes, they work and they're expensive, but they need to cater for everything. If you just have a simple static website, there's no need to put that on a behind an Express server on a Kubernetes cluster and auto scale that. You can just put it on CDN. And then the cost difference is tremendous. And that's just for the front end side alone. Databases tend to be the most critical part of any tech architecture. And there's such a large array of databases available today. And if every cloud vendor is offering managed solutions, let's say Azure's Cosmos DB or Google's Firebase, BigQuery, Bigtable, and AWS, They have every database. So AWS is a brilliant example of how databases, I think, can be optimized for cost. They have a database that is specialized for each type of data. So they have a key value store, they have a time series database, they have your generic SQL databases, and even amongst those, they have small subcategories of pre-provisioned or on-demand or auto-scaling. And this then ties very heavily into how you architect your actual product. If you know your product does not store relational data, or you can architect your product, or you can design your product, your code in such a way that it does not need relational data, then you do not need a SQL database. And SQL database, while they're extremely flexible, that flexibility comes at a cost. You need to pay for the CPUs, the RAM, the space. You need to monitor it. You need to auto scale it, and then you can only have read replicas by the nature of SQL, by the nature of relational databases. So that scales poorly and is off the bat more expensive than, say, just using DynamoDB, just using Firestore. If you can get away with those, then do it. You'll save a huge amount of money. So just ask yourself, do you really need a SQL database? If you don't, you could stand to save huge amounts of money and scale much more easily.
And when it comes to sort of computing power, so if your business is around running some data science programs or algorithms, what kind of cost saving can you make?
I would first look to say, let's see if you can get away with just using something like BigQuery to do your particular calculation, because that is famously dirt cheap. But if you do need actual raw compute, and you're starting to measure into just how many CPU cores you need, how many VMs you need to run, then there are, like, every cloud vendor will happily rent you CPUs and VMs at custom amounts, and they will all give either preempted bonuses or long-running bonuses. So because the way the vendors work, like if they know upfront demand, they can schedule it cheaper, and then they pass the savings on to you. So if you keep 10 VMs up for 3 years, that's very cheap for Amazon to maintain. So they give you something like 30% discount, sustained usage discounts, then they call it. And then there are other people then that have machines that they've rented, and they don't use them. These machines aren't clocked at 100% all the time. They're maybe sitting at 5, 10, 15%, some of them 0%. And these then get rented out as spot instances to other people on demand compute. They're already spun up. Your machines, you can rent them at a tiny fraction of the cost. And this is all automated now. So if you want spot instances, just tick the box and you get them. There's no barrier to using the cheapest thing available. There are downsides to using these instances, of course, but then again comes to what you use them for, how you architect this. And then there's, of course, serverless compute. So things like AWS Fargate, they will just give you on-demand compute, just as a pay-as-you-go. And pay-as-you-go is a very powerful thing here. Like, no company will rent servers and keep them locked at 100% for days and days, or maybe large data scientific work. But for your typical company, you rent servers out, you'll never use their full capacity, so why pay for that? And once your product is built and in maintenance mode, your number one cost is going to be the staff to maintain it and the cloud bill. So getting your cloud bill down when it matters is very important. Let's say you've grown to your luxurious position, you have 300 million users, and your cloud bill is suddenly millions per month. If your system can run 1% more efficiently, suddenly that matters. But if you're in the early stages, optimizing for this will likely cost you more in terms of time and opportunity than cloud bill savings. So there's a lot to be saved, and there's a perfect time to do it.
Yeah, I feel like using spot instances is quite a big thing, especially going back to this data science kind of idea or example, because most of the time the algorithms that you run can be asynchronous. Maybe your user is not specially waiting for an answer right now. You basically reading from a database, executing some algorithms, and then putting it back into a database to actually read it. So this kind of thing, you could definitely rely on spot instances.
It's more if the algorithm can be parallelized. How well can it be parallelized? If you can split up your large compute task into lots of small things, then you can make massive use of parallelization. You can schedule tasks for when spot instances become available. You can break up tasks into small things. Think of it as a large scale. In the interest of COVID-19, there's a project called Folding at Home, which is everybody can contribute small amounts of compute power just to fold proteins on your home laptop and whatnot. Your laptop becomes a spot instance for these researchers. It's the same principle. So yeah, they can schedule their task out, into billions of individual small jobs. And there are some algorithms that cannot be parallelized, but most can. And the more it can be, the better, the more advantage you can take of scheduling and just waiting for cheap instances to be available.
It actually makes me think about more of a microservice architecture then. And it makes me think about how it can influence the way you structure your application.
Yeah, so in recent years, there has been a massive trend of microservices. We've seen the rise of microservices and subsequently, in more recent years, the fall of microservices. So it turns out the upfront cost and long-term ongoing cost of managing a very large microservice architecture is extremely complicated. The benefits promised were you could scale individual parts of it very easily. So every service can scale, but the service that gets the most attention can scale independently of everything else. So this is good for, let's say, launching a new feature, or some particular feature of your app gets suddenly very popular at certain times of year. But the same can be achieved with sort of this pattern of distributed monoliths. So how it's actually scaling is still just some containers scaling more than other containers. And while that is good, and all that can be done serverless, I mean, if you split up your API enough, you could potentially just have serverless functions. And these are very, very small, very cheap. They're not even priced per CPU, they're priced per invocation. And then so it's, I mean, Amazon, for example, will give you 1 or 2 million invocations free per month. So the compute costs of these are so small, they're just priced by how often you call them. And we're talking, you're paying a few cents per million calls in some cases. Like these are very, very cheap calls. So yeah, if you can break up stuff into these sort of microservices, almost nano services, if you're going down to a functional level, then yeah, there's potential for tremendous savings there.
And when it comes to housekeeping, what are some of the things a team could also do? I'm thinking also around logs and data. Are they storing too much?
Yeah, so logs don't actually contribute too much to the cost. There is a cost for log retention, and anybody that's used CloudWatch for an extensive period of time knows that that cost is not trivial in the long run. Just ask yourself, what do you need to actually log? Do you need to log every single user request, or can you sub or maybe 10% of them? Do you need to just get a trend to see if you have high enough volume and you've got millions of people hitting your API every day, every hour, you don't need every single one of them. You just need to know, are you looking for if the API is down or the latency? You don't have to measure latency of every request. Just take a sample of the requests in a 1 second or 1 minute frame every 10 minutes, for example, and you've cut down your log cost by like 90% in terms of storage. And let's not forget processing all these logs. That takes power, CPU power to do as well. And do you really use them? Like what do you actually use them for? The obvious question is then, during a crisis where you actually have to drill down and look through all your logs to find out, let's say, for auditing purposes, or if you've been a victim of some cyber attack, you need to know exactly what's going on. So in that case, ask yourself which critical services do you actually need to monitor. So typically you'll monitor at the perimeter access logs or database access logs, but you wouldn't say monitor the apps, the latency of every single request. You wouldn't store the headers of every single request where you don't need to. So there's it's very easy as a developer to just say log everything, let ops deal with that. But and for small scale, that's perfectly fine. But for a very large scale, it suddenly becomes something to think about.
But I mean, you did mention this previously, but you can always try to cache a bit more things.
Yeah, and there's a sneaky there's a sly trick you can use for public data. Right? If your public data never changes or is append only, just stick it on a JSON file and put it on a CDN. Don't even pay for the database. It's about the cheapest way it goes. And I've done this personally in a number of cases, and I would recommend other people do it. Just have your CDN server.json file. And CDNs can serve stuff with content type headers as well. So you can have application JSON, and a browser or API would be none the wiser. And you'd have a very fast, globally distributed, extremely cheap database in a sense. And this is perfect for log data or just things that change so infrequently that it doesn't matter. And when they do change, you're simply just updating one JSON file somewhere in a GitHub repo. And it's you do it once every few months, years, even sometimes never. So I suppose you could ask yourself, do you really need a database at all? Should you be paying for that? It's very easy to just go, all right, we're building a new product. Let's just start off with the basics. Let's spin up a database, some backend, some Express server or Go server, some database, and go from there. But no, you can be cheeky sometimes.
And another thing, actually, so I was saying, I was reading this article from the UK Home Office for immigration, and one of the things that they did is around turning off servers during the weekends. And for them, it's quite easy to make this kind of decision because they're just working within the UK, and it's a government department as well. So certain services are not going to be used because they might only be internal services used by the workers. And so during the weekends, they just don't need to be running because no one is going to work on them.
Yeah, I would wonder why they would have to explicitly turn them off at the weekend when they can just simply have them on demand anyway. Just have them behave like Fargate or Lambda does, and just be on demand, so that when no one's using it, when everyone clocks out at 5 o'clock on a Friday, they'll naturally turn off anyway. There's no need to explicitly plan this. Just have them on demand, and you'll get this for free. So that bundles up into just re-architecting. I guess if you're planning, I guess it falls into the realm of technology as well. But if you're planning to optimize for cost, then the biggest cost is the time of developers, I think. And the more you can get out of them, so let's just say just simple things like good code practice, commenting stuff, and making sure that the code is clean, housekeeping wise there. So that you're paying developers regardless. And let's say there's a bug there, or you're adding a feature. The faster they can do that, the more value you get out of your initial cost anyway. So it's definitely a field. It's away from the actual raw nuts and bolts of technology itself, but it does form one of the largest cost bases. Okay,
and trying to look at the more resourcing perspective, because generally salaries are or the most expensive things that a company is going to pay, especially in tech. So if you look at the UK context with contractors and perm employees, do you think there's actually a strategy that companies can try to follow?
I mean, there's only one overall strategy, and that is to get the most out of your employees and make sure they have the skills necessary to do the task. There's no point having 1,000 people who are fairly around the average cost line, and they don't have the skills there. You'll never get your job done. You'll have 1,000 people to train up. Whereas you can get 1 or 2 very highly skilled people mixed in, and then they will get that 10% of work that requires that higher skill that will now be done, and then the majority of work can be handled by everyone else. And in that process, they will be upskilling. That they need someone to learn from. So a good strategy would be to hire enough people to do just proportionate. Like you have a few highly skilled people that do the difficult things, and then everything else. Because as human nature, highly skilled people want to do the difficult things. They don't want to do, let's say, let's just use the term junior work. Yeah. So just hire juniors, and juniors want to learn as well. So it's a very symbiotic environment you can create, and that pays off massively for companies that can build these cultures. So startups do this a lot. Startups, everybody would love to have a professional senior team, but that is not viable. Firstly, there aren't enough seniors to go around, and secondly, not everyone can afford it. But you can help the economy and yourself by just hiring a couple of seniors, giving them the environment to do their work, and then training up the next generation of staff.
Another thing is when it comes to working remotely, from my perspective, I can see it as a great way for companies to save cost.
So I actually worked on a 9-month contract a few years ago, which was fully remote, and my team was in Switzerland. The actual office was in Switzerland, but there were people remote from all over Europe and the world, actually. So the difficulties came with just time zones, having good communication, like internet quality and whatnot. So this company, they saw the benefits of it. They had good audio video equipment in the office. They wouldn't sort of try desperately to find a time where they can get everybody in a meeting just for the sake of having everyone in a meeting. I mean, you have to ask yourself, what is the point of having 20 people in the stand-up? What do you gain from that? Not that much. So yeah, this came down a lot to then the management structure. The skills of the product managers, or the project managers in this case. To efficiently divvy up the work in such a way that a person does not necessarily need to interact with the rest of the team to do this specific piece of work. And there's a lot to be said for good architecture, good modularization that allows this. But one of the key benefits then is you can source people from around the world, which obviously, to a Swiss company, everyone else is cheap. And obviously you can source a talent pool from across Europe, from across the Americas, everywhere. If you can't find enough people in your hometown to do the work, you've now the world becomes your recruiting pool. And there's definitely, and I've seen this personally, there's definitely a lot of it's very understated how efficient people can work and the quality of work they produce when you trust them to do it, because you cannot stand over their shoulder and you cannot micromanage them, especially just maybe if you had a micromanager in your office, well, suddenly the people from the other side of the world are working when this guy's asleep. So good work comes with trusting people to do it,
and they have more of an incentive to become productive.
Yeah, and then there's that sense of self-betterment, and like they take the time to learn something, they're trusted to do something, they're empowered to do something. That's something a lot of not enough companies have seen. But with the advent of this global lockdown, it's forcing companies into that route, and I think definitely more and more companies will see the benefit of this. There's a possibility companies will come out of this and say, right, well, during the lockdown, we had fewer people working, but they worked so much better. And they'll start looking into this, and I think remote working will definitely take off, and that will make the whole world, basically your office.
And having complete ownership of it really allows you to become a master of what you do.
Yeah, I mean, GitHub's a good example. GitHub had most of its developers remote, and they're one of the best online hosted Git solutions out there now.
Do you have any other tips, actually?
Yeah, I'd like to draw a comparison between company size and the cost it takes to do something. So let's say, so in the UK, we have a number of startup banks. The first one, Metro Bank, they are a traditional brick and mortar. They could have started with a clean digital solution, but they opted to go for a off-the-shelf system to get off the ground running. They went with a Swiss company, Terminus, the T24 system, which is a banking system quite widely used. And recently, they announced that they added analytics to their app. and they had one of the better apps for a bank in the UK. But it cost them somewhere around 50 million to add a bar chart of your spending. Obviously, it's much more complicated than that, but it still cost them quite a bit of money. But they did it. Monzo and Starling built the entire bank with all these features and more for less than it took Metro to do one feature. And these are both startups. They're both challenger banks. So you have to ask yourself, why does it cost 50 million to add an analytics feature compared to less than 50 million to build the entire bank? That is definitely a massive thing. I mean, being a big company does not mean it costs you more to do stuff. It doesn't have to. But one of the things here was just go back to like one decided to build something from scratch and one decided to build something from a vendor, and one got to market faster, but now is paying through the nose for just trying to stay relevant, whereas another is much more flexible. And that flexibility that's what I was saying at the start earlier, where you have to take a very long-term view of this. You need to build and maintain flexibility, otherwise the cost will just grow exponentially, and you repeat the same mistakes of all companies that came in the previous generation.
Thanks a lot, Stephen, for your time. It was really nice chatting with you.
Yeah.
And yeah, I wish we could talk more about this, but that's going to be it.
Okay, great. Thanks for having me.
Cheers.